Hello everyone. You are welcome to the second class on ADU 256 physics method. Remember, in our last class, we started talking about meaning of science, and we look into different definition of science. But in today's class, we want to further our discussion on meaning of science. And in today's discussion, we are going to look at the concept of nature of science. Nature of science. When you are talking about the nature of science, we are going to look into three different components that will enhance our discussion or description of nature of science. We are going to look at what are the processes of science, or you say methods of science. We are going to look at what we refer to as the product of science. We are going to look at the attitudes of human attitude towards science, human attitude of science. On another note, we're also going to look at different concepts, different terms, such as when you say concepts in science, what does it mean? We're going to explain the true meaning of the word principle, scientific principles. We're going to also going to look at the meaning of the word law, scientific law, and scientific theory. So those four important words: concepts, principles, laws, theories. And we're also going to examine the word fact. When you say scientific fact, what does it mean? So that will be the primary focus, you know, in this class. So, like in our usual practice, get your pen, write the material, and let's meet on our learning platform. So, meet you there. Now, welcome back to the learning platform, and we're going to continue our discussion on meaning of science and nature of science. As we have said in the introductory part, my name is Amusa Oluwadamilare, and of course, my email is there. If you wish to have anything to do with my mail, any message to me. Now, we'll look at what will be our intended learning outcome. At the end of this class, you should be able to explain the nature of science, list the process or processes of science, which is also known as method of science. List and explain scientific attitudes. What are scientific attitudes? And finally, list and explain what we mean by product of science. Product of science. With nature of science. How do you describe science? Science can be basically described with three basic constructs. In trying to explain nature of science, you use three basic constructs or three basic approaches to explain that. We have the process of science, process or method of science. We have products of science, and also explain human attitude to science. This you should not forget all these three important. Now, I'm also going to, in explaining nature of science, we have what we call concepts, facts, theories, and law. You should not forget, the major goal of science is to understand the world around us. The world around us. And in understanding the world around us, there are some very important constructs you must know. There's what we call concept. What does concept mean? There is a fact, scientific concept, scientific fact, scientific principles, scientific theories, scientific laws. These are theoretical basis for what we do in science. Whatever scientists do, they must belong to this construct, one of these constructs. So I will give more explanation as we proceed. Processes of science. What do you mean by processes of science? Processes of science are basically the method and skills that scientists employ in their work. Processes of science are the scientific activity, that science they engage in. And you can see the long list: identifying problems, they engage in observation, they hypothesize, you know, the formulation of hypothesis. That one is very key. They analyze. Scientists inferring, classifying. After inferring, they make sure things are grouping. So that's what referred to as classifying. Measuring, they measure. Describe. Scientists should be able to describe. Whatever you have seen, whatever you observe, you describe. Experimenting, or you say experimentation. So it is important that scientists go through experimentation. There are a lot of instruments, a lot of apparatus that are used during experimentation. They also go to the extent of asking insightful questions, meaningful questions they ask. They formulate problems, problem formulation or formulating problems. They design experiments, like we said earlier on. They construct laws, principles, generalization, and so on and so forth. So these are what we refer to as processes of science. If you are asked what are processes of science or methods of science, these are what scientists are generally referring to. We also look at what are the basic attitudes of scientists or human to science. This refers to the belief, the values, and the opinions, qualities that are held in high esteem by scientists. Scientists, they don't joke with these attitudes, and it entails suspending judgment until enough data is or are collected. Scientists will not on their own bring up judgment or final fact unless they have enough data to make that. Objectivity, in dealing with data, while collecting, their objective, while analyzing, evaluating, and while they're interpreting, they always ensure that they are very, very objective in whatever they say. And intense curiosity, by being fascinated with the world around them. They try to see what goes around. Any small thing caught their attention. So these are some of the attitudes that scientists must have. Humility and skepticism. Being free from pride and arrogance, as well as taking everything with a pinch of salt. They are humble. They don't just accept what you give to them. They are always skeptical. They're skeptical, and they have listening ear, but they are skeptical. So these are also part of the scientific attitudes. So tenacity, by thinking positively about failure and not giving up very easily. Scientists don't give up. They can pursue an agenda for the next 20 years. They will continue to, and that is why you can see that in space exploration, before they get to that level, they continue. Open-mindedness, they are free from prejudice and personal biases. Open-mindedness, they are open. So they have strong determination when they pursue a goal, strong determination there, and they are generally honest. Scientists are generally honest. So these are scientific attitude. They ask questions, divergent and convergent, question of what, how, when, where, and why. So these are some of those things that now at this point now, let us try and think, get your pen, and describe the relevance of scientific attitude to the method of science. We have explained, the process of science earlier, and now we have been able to see we have explained the scientific attitudes. So establish a relationship and send to our discussion forum. Let's move on. Now, product of science. When you say product of science, we are not necessarily talking about finished goods and services derived from the application of knowledge of science. No. We're not talking about our cars, the planes, all those computers, all those scientific things, those tangible things that. But when we talk about product of science in this context, we're referring to the knowledge that came from scientific inquiry, the knowledge, the concepts, the generalization that came from scientific inquiries, the algorithm, the models, the principles, the theories, and the laws. These are what we refer to as product of science. So all these things you should know when we're talking about product of science. On the other hand, the nature of science are those qualities or elements which make science what it is. We are trying to explain, nature of science. While the scientific method are systematic and tend to be static, the products of science are dynamic and generative, depending on the extent of data available at any time. So these products of science are not static; they are dynamic. They are dynamic, and the um, scientific processes or scientific method we explained earlier, those ones are fixed. There's no replacement for experimentation. There's no replacement for observations. There's no replacement for all those constructs that you see under processes of science. But in the product of science, they are subject to change depending on the new findings. So the nature of science basically are described using those things: the process of method of science, the product of science, and human attitude to science. So that is what we generally refer to as. Now let's look at the meaning of some of those uh, constructs in the product of science. One of which is the scientific concept. These are words, or you say group of words, terms, label, symbols, which define the correctness of what is perceived in events or record of events or phenomenon. Concrete or empirical concept is a type of concept. We have volume, density, and so on and so forth. We also have theoretical concepts, theoretical concepts like atom, molecule. So this is what scientific concepts. Now, scientific theory. A theory is the logical explanation for events which occur in nature based on facts, based on facts, observation, or experimentation. So scientists use the fact or concepts they have gathered to propose explanation for observed event or phenomenon. Then experiments are performed to test their explanation. After studying the facts, making observation, and performing experiments, scientists may develop a theory. So these are just the basic things that is. So it's also a product of science. Common examples of theories are the Darwin atomic theory, kinetic theory of matter, theory of relativity, and so on, and so forth. Look at what do you mean by scientific law. When a theory survives many tests, of course, theory must survive many tests and become accepted as true in the community of scientists, then scientists call it a law. It is called a law. So theories are, passed into scientific law. A law is a statement of what happens or what will happen under certain given initial condition. Scientific law must express a consistency or uniformity among observation of natural phenomena and must involve the use of concepts. So you don't just come across scientific law. It has stages, it has processes. So you can see law of gravitational force, Newton's law of motion. Of course, you have three law of Newton's law of motion. Those are laws. Law of universal gravitation and law of gravity, as you can see on your slide. So that is scientific law. We also have what we call scientific principles. Scientific principles. Simple principles are more complex ideas based on several complex concepts. So the fundamental principles that guide scientific enterprise are, we're trying to give an example of scientific principle now. Seeking conceptual, you know, understanding, or we call it theoretical understanding. It is a principle in science, scientific principle. Posing empirically testable and refutable hypothesis. You get that now? Empirically testable and refutable hypothesis. So that is part of science. So you don't just come and put up a fact. They must follow these scientific principles. Designing studies that test and can rule out competing, counter hypotheses. So this is just a brief explanation of. Now, in our class activity for the second time, I want you to describe 5 major products of science. Describe them in writing beside goods and services that is known to most. A quick wrap up of what you have learned in this class. We have learned the description of the nature of science. We talked about process of science. We talked about product of science and also human attitude of science. We look at the constructs such as concepts, facts, principles, theories, law, and so on. So on this note, we are going to stop our class. We'll meet in our next class when we shall come up with a new topic. And with this, we have ended our discussion on meaning of science. Until we meet then, bye.